Well, thank you very much, Danielle, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, for being part of the second international workshop in time studies and in childhood and youth. I'm very glad to take a bit of time of you to share some of the insights from the work we've been doing in the project together with Professor Daniel Gabaldon and Sandra Leo, my other mates in this journey. And I also want to express my gratitude to them for making me part of the project and also making me a part of this opportunity to expand discussion on these issues. Well, what I would like to share with you today, and I have to be short and be in time because time matters for all of us indeed. It's part of the insights and findings concerning the study of school time organization in Spain we've been doing. And we've been working this within a comparative perspective, which is what I'm going to share now, but also an international, not cross-national, international comparison within the different regions of Spain. And that's also putting it into these international perspectives, mainly on the average of European Union and OECD. So we've done 2 papers, and I think you have them also in the archive. Otherwise, we can also share them later. One is going to be presented still in a congress, but the other one is already published. And as I said, first we started working to find the intra-regional differences and similarities within the territory of Spain. That was last year, and putting that in the context of the European countries and OECD countries. And this is what I'm first going to explain. It is true that school time and how it's distributed and the implications of this distribution has been already discussed in this international perspective, but it's also true that it has not been so discussed in terms of how this distribution or in terms of the location of different subjects or contents and structure of the sessions and breaks around this distribution, how it's been that regulated or not regulated, and the implications of this regulation or no regulation in the decisions that finally affect to the everyday living and school and schooling of children. Well, in the case of Spain, we can say it's a very paradigmatic case because in many regions, the structure of the sessions and the breaks of the school day, including lunchtime or living time, and particularly in the public founded centers, we found out that at the Spanish level, comparing it with the European countries, the structure is including the breaks in a different way, especially in primary schools, because we may say also that this is completely different according to the school time organization in secondary education centers. But we start from the point of view that Spain is quite different and has huge differences when we compare it with other countries. In terms of instructional time, according to a regular or theoretical school year, the number of hours is quite similar, or it's not so big. It's a bit higher if we compare with OECD countries, and also if we compare with European countries. But and also we can say it's the same trend than in OECD and the European countries, that secondary education has more hours, in this case 224 hours more than in primary school. But the time and how the time is devoted to the instruction of both stages, it's both stages compulsory education is quite high, as we can or we will see later. What we've done, as I said before, is to compare the regulations, because they have been changing quite often, and in the last few years there has been quite a social and political debate around the organization of school time and the model of split or compacted school day time in the different regions of Spain, and looking at the changes and how that has been affected the total amount of hours per year. We've been comparing the differences, firstly in, as I said before, in a international level, so within the regions, different regions of Spain. We have there in the graphic, as you can see, for primary education and pre-primary education, because in Spain they're both together at the same institutions and buildings, so they share the same organization of the school day. And we could see that there are important differences within the regions, not towards Spain, but within different regions of Spain. If you can see in the graphic, make in total per school year differences of 200 more or less hours, 200 hours more or less of teaching after or once the school year has passed. Comparing that with the European Union, we could see that in average Spain is higher, and most of the communities of the regions are higher than the European Union. But also, again, we could see differences, and some of the regions even below this average of the European Union. That was for the past academic course. And based on this analysis that has been considering the different changes on the regulations, as I said before, we, besides identification these similarities and differences, we were going to the conclusion that it's also creating imbalance in the current Spanish educational system in terms of having different, not only different amounts of hours, but also different ways to manage these hours along the week. Having very varied situations, even in the same region, such as the case of Navarra, where it could happen that kids have the hours in the same period during the day, the whole day, and very intense day in this compacted model, or having few days, also a split situation, a split day, and sharing some of these hours in the noon, and in the rest having also of the territory having also another or a third situation, which is mixing both models. No, sorry, I have explained a mixed model. So having the model that normally is established in the rest of Europe and also in other parts of Spain, which is split day and not exceeding from these 4 hours a day. If we go into, when we were going to compulsory education to see, sorry for the mistake on the title, to see the differences, there were even bigger. There the situation is different because mostly in secondary, compulsory secondary education in Spain, the organization of time during the school day is compacted. So there are exceptions where it's not like this. But again, there is a recommendation for the state, for the national government, so the Ministry of Education, to not to exceed 20 hours per week. And this recommendation, we found out that has not been followed for many of the regions, and has been creating also many differences within the regions. So we could see in the screen how the total amount of hours per school year can be as high or around 600 in the case of Canarias, and compare with that, we can see on top of above the 1,000 hours, other communities such as País Vasco, Catalunya, Andalusia, Cantabria, La Rioja, or Extremadura. Comparing that with the European Union and the average of Spain, it also leaves a lot of regions under them and below these points, and so creating like two scenarios, from my point of view, that are given priority to this trend to expand hours of instruction, and or on the contrary to diminish this time of instruction in terms of leaving or excluding hours from the instructional time, and in the end, once the academic year is done, having huge differences, as I said, because they can be from 400 hours if we compare regions, the different regions of Spain. Doesn't have to do much with south or north regions, but we could say that have to do, or we could ask ourselves if it has to do with models of instruction and presence of a bigger importance of public or private institutions in the region. That's something we could also ask ourselves. Analyzing, besides comparing the differences and similarities, analyzing the time that children spend in compulsory secondary education in Spain, we can say that the total amount of annual hours is more than in the rest of European countries, but especially we can emphasize these huge differences that we have within the same territory and even within the region. Even, as I said before, there is a recommendation to not to exceed these 20 hours per week in Spain. Oh, sorry. Here we have talking on the level of implementation of compacted school day in Europe, and seeing this particular case that Spain has along the consensus on the on the model of instruction in terms of the school day and the model of or the type of organization in the school day. Differences also within other countries of the Euro area, where we can see that the mixed model is more an exception than a trend, because it seems like South countries are the countries that have this mixed model. And as I said before, this mixed model means not mixing only by regions, but mixing even within the regions, which leads to differences also within the same region. And we can see that the split model is the most common model in the rest of Europe, also having implications in the organization of breaks within this model, and how this is affecting to the health of children, and obviously to the success or not success of children in school. As conclusions, we can see that even that the number of school days in Spain are on average, comparing with OECD or European Union, in terms of hours, because of the load of hours that we have in the school day, the differences are huge, and especially for some of the regions within our country. And this controversy that we're having around the model and which model to establish, that lately is being decided more for parents than for educational authorities, has been leading, we can say, and we can say to huge differences within the regions and even within the same region of Spain, which has consequences also for the equity and the equity of opportunities of learning for children even from the same region. The compacted school day is exception in Europe, as we've seen now, and predominates mostly the school day departure. And in addition to this trend, we can also emphasize that the split day in Europe has this extensive use of breaks and use of meal breaks as part of the learning process, and which has implications for the health of children, but also implications for a better educational harmony, I would say, to leave the educational journey with another feeling and with another pressure, which is not what they live now in Spain, what children live now in Spain. And if we add to that what we were discussing before, which is after this long journey and these long hours with breaks that are more thought in terms of covering the break for eating, but not the break for learning. If we add to that all this time that children spend afterwards in educational activities in home, this could in Spain, children, we have this sentence: start very, very happy when they start the educational trajectory in kindergarten or preschool, you'd say, and as long as they start growing and they start being older in the educational system, they don't go so happy to school, and school starts being or starts to be lived in another way, which is not so happy. And I would say this happy for children, harmonious in the end for children. This is a question that particularly I think we need to deep in and study better, and how that is reflected in the hours they spend later in their houses or in the home environment, dedicating to other educational activities. I think that's something we need to discuss in Spain. Thank you very much. I apologize if I wasn't very clear in some of the explanations, and I invite you to open questions or open debate about what I've been explaining. But also, I think we can part of the literature that you could say on the sources of the graphics and maps that I've been using through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. I would say it was very clear, but of course, as I'm behind also the paper, I'm probably not the neutral person to say it. I would like, if somebody has a question or something you would like to inquire about this.
Yes, thanks a lot, Anna. Very interesting talk, and I'm really interested about these differences between, you know, like the break and the extended schedule of schools. There is also going on now a debate on whether this can harm children or not. So can you summarize a little bit? So how can these affect children's daily activities and well-being? So if you, I really like this map that you presented showing the cross-national differences. So what is the literature telling us about what are the pros and cons of this type of schedules? Because it's not always easy to measure it, right? So in some countries, they say that they do a break, but the break is really short. In others, they say that there is a break for eating, but there are lots of differences. So how does this affect child well-being from or daily lives? I don't know if there are studies going on or debates about it in a European perspective.
Yeah, well, I think we can find that in some of the OECD reports, even in PISA, in the last PISA, you've got some of the well-being indicators that are being crossed with the part of the organization of school day. But I think you are precisely asking more about how is that affecting to the life and to the well-being of children. Well, we know in Spain, and this is something that even the pediatrics are telling us, that children don't live in a healthy manner this intense or very intense and compacted school day, because first it's not going with the rhythm of growing, rhythm of learning, and also we need to consider that it brings to a time to eat, a lunch time that is really late for children, and that we could consider with many other things that are particular from Spain, which is, the breakfast in Spain, and the time for having breakfast in Spain is very different from other countries, and also the importance of breakfast in Spain is not so important as in other countries. So then the break to eat in Spain in the middle of the morning is very important, and they need to eat a lot because this breakfast wasn't so important at home. And that also brings to a very long break in primary school, but not so long in secondary school. In the end, and summarizing, I think there's literature, and Daniel probably will tell you more than me about it, but summarizing is not, for me, it's not having so much in account the inherent necessities of children in terms of physical development, but also in terms of learning development, because we also know that there are some times of the day that are better to learn than others, or to do some activities than others, and this is not being taken into account in this compacted model. It's more about how we fit the hours and how that is making that we end up earlier the school day, and that is having for children in terms of their learning, because I think it's a rhythm that is not natural for them, so it's a bit forced. And if you're being forced in any way or with any pressure, for sure, I think there's no doubt for us that it has a big consequence and implication in your learning, because any pressure or any anxiety is not gonna leave space for this process of education to go smooth, or to just work in a proper way, I would say. So plus the very concentrated time for very small children, because this is something I think for sure Daniel is going to talk about, that children are not ready for such a long journeys or such a long days or mornings until 2 p.m. To be learning until that time. We know that from 12:30 p.m. on, this time for learning would be useless. That's my opinion, and that's the what I've been reading in literature. But besides that, I have this feeling that I was trying to tell, that if we put all together with the rest of the day and what you were presenting, so that after that they also spend a lot of hours again dedicated to education, in the end it's a nightmare for them. It's not a pleasure or a place to be willing to go, but in the end it turns into a place or a task you don't want to hear anymore, because it has been taken so long from your day. That's just one humble point of view. And I'm sure Daniel is going to tell more about this. Thank you.
I have to be careful when asking me these things, because now I can take 2 hours to to give a seminar here. I try to be brief, but yes, I think what Anna said is very right. Basically, there is consequences on this intense schedule. On the one hand, because one of our presumptions, and this is what we want to further research more, is that the school time in Spain starts too early, because even if it's 9 in primary and 8 in secondary education, as we are 1 or 2 hours far away from a real hour, it's actually earlier. So students are more tired and half sleepy, and they start really getting to know what is going on later in the morning. And this probably is why we need to compensate so much also with private classes and private tutoring, because we are putting the lessons in an hour when the efficiency of the learning is very low. This is one thing. Another thing is that we saw also in this Guía de Tiempos Escolares that we did some years ago with Sandra. What we see is that in Spain, the load is very, very flat. So children already from 3 years old will spend the same hours in the classroom as children of 12 years old. And you can imagine that from 3 to 12 years old, there is a full amount of changes and capacities changing over time. But the school in Spain is very, very blind for that. So we offer the same, even the same schedule. No? Even at the school, they enter and there is a ring bell for everybody to enter, a ring bell for everybody to go out in the break. Now those things have changed a bit because of the COVID, but the tendency was exactly the same thing. When you look at some other systems, especially in Nordic countries, you see that they tend to adapt much better to the age. So children start with very few hours of class or 2 hours and a half of class when they are very small, and then they will go increasing as they have their capacity. So we have, for one hand, probably badly located the hours and badly located the number of instruction hours. This, of course, affects also the quality of the teaching, because children start getting more tired. And then there is also these advices what we get also from people, from the medical doctors and pediatric associations, which is first that children should sleep enough, and putting it too early doesn't allow them to sleep enough. Then they should also make the appropriate breaks for feeding themselves. There is also a correlation between trying to have breakfast too early and not eating really. And I can see it in my children, depending on what time they enter, they just have a glass of milk or they have a sandwich. And I feel it also myself. If I wait a bit later to have a breakfast, then I have a big start on how much to eat. And also the lunch break. We have done, together with Kadri Tat from Tallinn University, a study on the use time survey of Spanish data. And we have been able to compare the time use for children who attend compact school hours and split school hours. And we have seen something that caught our attention was people who are in the compact hours, the compact arrangement, gain in mean 1 minute more a day of time with the family. So only 1 minute more of time with the family. And they sleep, I think was about 20-something minutes less a day. And they also have the lunch in between an hour and a half later. So studies also on pediatrics are showing that delaying the lunch time after 3 is correlated with increasing obesity. And really the time what they lose in sleeping is not covered with, I mean, first of all, we don't know exactly how to explain this, that they sleep less, because actually the dinner time is about the same time. The entering time, the school time is about the same one, but they have much later lunch. And probably this, my prediction or my assumption is that it causes some type of stress and then makes them to go to bed later. But this is something we still have to further study. For sure, we can get some hints from your studies as well. I don't know whether you have answered your question or created more chaos.
I like to add something to what Daniel explained so well, and it is to the fact that early childhood education is within the primary schools as well. So we have pre-primary and primary education all together in the same building, as Daniel was saying. They're doing the same not timetable, but they're doing the same school day. And as we all know, they have different necessities, especially when they're very, very young, because they can start in Spain as young as 3-year-old. And then the decisions on how this schedule and how this timetable is being made, many times it's not being taken in account with the rhythms of children. So, for instance, there's no space for a nap. This is completely different and out of the debate in the rest of European countries where naps are part of the timetable. We don't have naps. we have, if the share is split, we have another, it's not the school, it's another enterprise who is taking care of the time to eat and the time to rest, and depends on them and not on the decisions of the school or the parents if the children sleep or not. So they can be from 9 to 5 non-stopping. And we know that children from 3 to 6 can be non-stopping, but we also know that they need to rest and they need naps or time to relax or things like that. And this is not something that is being integrated into the decisions of the pedagogical time with the preschool teacher. So it's just another decision that the company will decide besides and apart. And even if the families will ask for this time to sleep, if the decision is not, it will be not. Even the children are falling apart and sleeping everywhere because, as you can think, small children in the end are entering back into the class at 3 when they have eaten and they have been non-stopping, and whatever the teacher or the caregiver wants to do maybe will be useless because they will fall asleep at that time. There will be no point in planning any pedagogical activities. But there is no harmony or work together with these two teams, or even some authority from the preschool teacher to say, no, listen, children who are staying here and not going back home to eat need to rest a little bit, so when they're back in the class, we can work or do whatever we have to do. So imagine in these terms, we have no consents or no regulations or no stipulations. That's leading to many different scenarios for little children that they need to face together with what Daniel is saying. So they have been getting up too early, eating too less, they're not resting in the whole day. So in the end, at 4:35, when you pick up these little boys and girls, they're not human anymore. They're little pieces of them, because it's too. This point of view from a early childhood pedagogue, I think it's this very intense school day is too much for them, as it would be too much for any of us. This is my point of view. Nothing else.
Thank you.